Well, welcome everybody. Um, because I do not live in a hole under the ground somewhere, I understand how many of us are feeling this morning after such a crazy week. If you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe you just moved to the United States of America and it's new, but those of us here have had a rough season, haven't we? Every Thursday evening, we gather together online and in person here at the church for something called Cultivating the Heart. And this past Thursday was different than most of our other gatherings. The air just felt kind of thick with the weight of the recent events, the inauguration and its aftermath pressing on all of us. And I was looking around the room and on the screen at the faces, and it wasn't a terribly unusual group. It was a decent sampling of American society. And in each voice, I heard the echoes of our shared emotions. We were uncertain, we were afraid, and we had a waning hope about our future and our place in it. You know, this morning, countless pastors will step up behind their pulpits ready to deliver pointed critiques of the new administration. And I think that's fine, but I think we're only just barely touching the surface of the words that Bishop Buddy spoke this past week. If you haven't heard what she said, I encourage you to hop on YouTube this week and just you will find it instantly. She had some amazing things to say with such clarity and grace. Instead of me doing that this morning, I want you to know that my heart is here with this community, with all of you who call CIB your sanctuary. I know many of you personally, and I'm still getting to know a lot of you. But here's a truth that might surprise you today. Something has changed in the past week here in the United States of America. Today, and going forward, at least for the next 4 years, we are the minority. Communities like ours are now the minority. Our church as a whole, and I'm not saying this because this is written down in a list of beliefs somewhere, and you might believe a little bit differently, but our church as a whole is a church that is known for embracing beliefs and practices, deliberately embracing them, that stand in opposition to the executive orders that were signed this week. Those restricting immigration from Muslim-majority nations, limiting LGBTQ plus protections, and threatening sanctuary cities. These things strike at the heart of our congregation's values and at the heart of many of our families. We don't hold this stance out of arrogance or because we claim to have a handle on absolute truth. Yet watching those orders being signed left me kind of shaken. Not just because of their practical implications in the world, but more so because they reflect the majority will of the people in our country. Our neighbors, our colleagues, our friends, members of our community. And there's so many people this week that are boisterous. They're ecstatic. They're so happy because they see this light finally arriving. And I don't feel that way at all. To me, it looks like darkness. And I can't deny that reality. This is our shared experience now. And you might not want to be in this place, but you are. Among us are parents of transgender children, partners in same-sex relationships, families with loved ones seeking sanctuary from Muslim-majority countries. And the data speaks clearly, ladies and gentlemen, friends, family, The majority has voiced its choice, and you lost. We have become like stones that builders reject, fundamental to the foundation, but pushed aside, not just unwelcome, but deliberately excluded from the architectural plans of a new golden age in America. And if you are carrying that weight, that paradox this morning where you're so happy to live in a free country, when you look at some other nations around the world, you think, God, I am so blessed to live in the United States. And then on the other side of your being, you're thinking, woe and doom and darkness. If that's how you feel this morning, you're not alone. I'm there with you. If you're starting to look over your shoulder when you're walking around town, I understand. I'm with you. This morning, I want to ask us to consider a thought from the Psalms in the Old Testament. The Psalms are, I guess you would call them an anthology of Hebrew music and poetry and hymns. And they speak directly to our experience as a now minority voice in the United States of America. Psalm 23, you've probably heard it before. It says this, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters." Isn't that beautiful? Aren't those encouraging words this morning? But listen to this. This is the psalm right before that one in your Bible. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me and from the words of my anguish? When we stack these two psalms side by side, we begin to see a picture of human life. Sometimes we are in green pastures. Sometimes we cry into the night in pain and anguish. Nothing could be more honest about human life than the contrast we see between these two passages. And that's exactly where God sees each of us. In that paradox, in these experiences that we have that make us go, God, I'm so grateful. I feel so close. You have blessed me. You care for me. And in the very next breath, shouting at the heavens, my God, why have you forsaken me? Where are you? Can't you see that I'm in distress, that I'm in pain? God sees and provides for us there. There is a name of God in the Old Testament that you won't see unless you read the Old Testament in the original language it was penned in. But one of the Hebrew names for God in the Old Testament is pronounced Yireh. Can you say that? Yireh. And what that translates to is the Lord who sees and provides. Yireh is the word for to see or sees. The Lord who sees and provides. It's not just seeing someone and then being like, I see that you're in pain. Well, best of luck to you. No, it's someone who sees and says, I see, I want to get involved. I want to help. I want to provide. When the Hebrew slaves cried out in the Old Testament, living in slavery under the Egyptian monarchy, the Lord saw and provided. When Ruth was gleaning alone in foreign fields, the Lord saw and provided. When Daniel prayed in defiance of an empire, the Lord saw and provided. And today, in our own exile from majority religious culture, the Lord sees us, and the Lord will provide. Here's what I want you to remember this morning. Knowing we are seen by God changes how we see others. Knowing we are seen by God changes how we see others. This divine perspective that we each have the opportunity to take in human life empowers each of us to view each person we meet with clarity and compassion. And as we move forward, this understanding calls us to create spaces in this world where fears can be shared openly, where those affected by discriminatory policies can find support and shelter, and if need be, sanctuary, and where collective anxiety can be transformed into collective love. Christianity has long enjoyed a kind of privileged position in American society. Not always, but for the most part, being Christian traditionally signified that you were someone of kindness and moral character and patience. Yet today, the mere declaration of saying, "I am a Christian," prompts the inevitable follow-up. Well, what kind of Christian are you? Am I right? This shift didn't happen by accident. The Christian label has been tarnished by those who claimed it while contradicting its core teachings, shoving us all, like it or not, into long seasons of cognitive dissonance. And perhaps this season in our nation serves a deeper purpose for people like you and me, the minority of religious culture. Perhaps this season in our nation is gently pushing us to confront the gap between our proclamation of something and our practice of something. Maybe this is more important than words. Maybe this has to translate into mass viral action. You know, historical accounts from non-Christians during Roman times illuminate Christianity's authentic expression as it was newly forming, the very first church. Around 165 AD, the satirist Lucian wrote, "From the moment that they are converted, the Christians deny the gods of Greece and worship the crucified sage and live after his laws." Even more telling is the reluctant admiration from Julian the Apostate, a Roman emperor who opposed Christianity. You've got to really be opposing Christianity if your name is Julian the Apostate. I mean, that's just one of the worst things you can call someone. But he wrote this about the Christians. "The Christians support not only their own poor, but ours as well. And all men see that our people lack aid from us." What he's saying here is, we have our beliefs, we have our culture, we're Romans, we're the most powerful nation on the face of the earth. And we're not caring for some of our own people. And you know who's stepping in and doing it? The Christians. And that's bothering me, Julian the Apostate. I don't like the way that makes me look. I have enough for everybody. And the Christians are showing me that I'm just not being generous with it. And so my question is, if Christianity forms inside of the Roman Empire, which quite honestly bears a lot of resemblance to our current empire, not in every way, but in so many ways. Leaders that are out of touch with the everyday experiences of their constituents. A society where poor people always sit on the bottom and rich people always sit in the boxes at the top. A society that's bent on keeping us entertained with violence and mockery, rather than just being good to one another in a billion quiet ways. My question is, if that's the environment that Christianity began in and flourished, why can't it do that now? What if we went forth in this next season actually doing that? Not so much concerned with telling people what we believe and how that contrasts with what they believe and who's wrong and who's right. No. But by being kind to people in a billion little ways. So that someone from the other side looks at us, looks at our lives, and says, well, I'm a religious person. I believe in God, and I think the country's headed in a great direction. And watching things fall by the wayside, and then seeing all of these minority little Christians just filling in those gaps with kindness and goodness and love. What would that do to the name of Christ, the name of God? Would we finally stop associating it with flags and empires and instead associate it with a way of being, a way of living, of embodying something that is so strange, so contrary, so countercultural? This is what the church did in ancient Rome, so maybe it's okay to do it in the new one. How are we doing on time? Somebody got the time? Can you give me 5 more minutes? Raise your hand if you can give me 5 more minutes. 5, 10, 15, 20. That's plenty of time. My dad is the whitest man in the history of the world. He still, to this day, wears tube socks that he pulls up and wears them with shorts and cross trainers and a kind of sombrero when he cuts the grass. He always tucks his shirt in. He always trims his shrubs. My dad is the whitest suburban man you'll ever meet. When I was a child, we moved into the city of Flint, Michigan. And if you don't know anything about Flint, think of a place that just really struggles. A place that's always booming and busting. A place where there's a lot of poverty, lots of segregation. And so my dad gets a job offer at a church in a predominantly black neighborhood inside of Flint, Michigan. The whitest man in America. And as we moved there and I started to make friends and my dad got to know people, summers would roll around. And back then when it was summer, you either went to work with your parents or you just wandered the planet alone. And so sometimes my dad would invite me to go to work with him. And I remember one day on his lunch break, he had a basketball in his office. And he was wanting to take a lunch break and for he and I to go shoot some hoops at the park across the street. But this wasn't one of those parks that had any trees in it. It didn't have any water fountains in it. There weren't little babies crawling in the grass and people walking their dogs. It wasn't that kind of park. It was the kind of park that you could hear the music from 3 blocks away. It was the kind of park that was filled with rough people. And my dad, to my own terror as a little boy, he reached out his hand and he said, "Come on, Ryan, we're going to go across the street and play basketball." And I'm not trying to call out skin color or anything like that, but I'm just being honest. My dad and I were the only white people on that basketball court. And my dad walks right into the middle of the game, He doesn't wait until it's time for a break to interrupt. He walks right into the middle of the game and sticks out his hand, and in his Texas accent, he says, "Hi there. I'm Pastor A.C. Phipps from across the street. Me and my boy want to know if we can play basketball with you." And you would have thought that the person he said this to just witnessed the arrival of an extraterrestrial from outer space. I mean, I didn't even have any social cues or social wisdom yet. And even as a kid, I understood, like, this is really awkward. And the guy was so dumbfounded, I think he just agreed with my dad, and he said, "Sure." And so the very next minute, my dad and I are in this basketball game with these probably, I don't know, late teen, early 20-year-olds. And they're like, I can tell they're dumbing it down to my level so that I can play with them. I mean, these guys were good. And they're dumbing it down to my level so I can play with them. And one of them passed it to me, and I did a layup. And all of the people that were so intimidating before and I was so scared of, they're all sitting there clapping and cheering and smiling. Why is that? And let me just be honest. Let me just be really real this morning. Are we really stupid enough to believe that basketball court is dangerous just because of the skin color of the people on it? And my dad understood this. He understood that the people across the street from the church that didn't look like people in the church, that didn't believe what people in the church believed, my dad understood that they were people. And that all people want the same thing. People really do want to get along. People really do want to coexist. And sometimes you just need some strange character to walk across the street and stick out his hand. Because from that point on, we could go back there and play as much as we wanted. And we were welcome and we were glad to be seen. And the name of God was not tarnished that day. The name of Christ was not portrayed as something of, oh, I'm bringing something down to you because you're just so helpless. No, it was, I like basketball, you like basketball. Why don't we make it about basketball? Why don't we make it about having fun together and playing on teams together? And if our Christianity is anything other than that, I just don't know that that's Christianity. And I'm sorry to go over today. That wasn't in my notes, but I think that's what the answer is in this next season. We're not going to change the world this next season. God's word to us is what he spoke to the churches in Revelation, to strengthen that which remains. Don't become lukewarm. Pick a side and stand up for it. And if we do that on a long enough timeline, no matter who is in office, people will benefit from that. And we will win. Let's pray.